Hey everyone and welcome back to the news. So, what a crazy while it has been for World of Warcraft. We've got an anniversary raid being confirmed, classic beta and a whole bunch else dropping, plus a few very strong developments for the live game. And because there's so much, let's just get right into it with World of Warcraft Classic. So, beta is here and I'm happy to confirm that I do have access to the beta. It did hit at a pretty busy time for me personally, so I did not have time to dive into it over the weekend, but watching people's reactions has almost been more interesting for me. I mean, hey, I've played World of Warcraft Classic before anyway. So for me, the core is pretty simple. It's texture over polish. The current game typically attempts to make things quite beautiful, design-wise. You know, classes that fit together perfectly with tight timings, rotations that very, very carefully evoke the particular gameplay design of a spec as dictated by Blizzard. As for Classic, well, loads of it's messy. The classes are really designed around sort of core capability and fantasy first. They're not designed around having a super fun series of buttons to hit. And that extends towards just about everything else. Classic is imperfect, but it allows for a lot of freedom and really just greater ownership over your class, a greater sense of identity. The path forward is less clear, it is less designed, and that means that the path you take is, well, your own, and that matters to people. Teamwork feels satisfying because the classes are less well-rounded, meaning that the player just feels more important, at least, say, in a 5-player context. And the game is punishing. Overpulling and dying is far more easy. You're far more likely to have to use every trick in the book from your class to emerge from a fight with just a sliver of health left. And that's the thing. Classic, I think, manages to create these really strong player stories pretty frequently, and it's got a very satisfying progression that serves as, I think, a reminder of what people find satisfying. In a world where it often feels like Blizzard are problem solvers who happen to work in the games industry, it's important to just see the player stories that the roughness of Classic creates, and how in a socially driven MMO, that's a really important thing. Of course, Blizzard themselves are aware of this. Take classes. Classic classes are not perfectly balanced, and the same goes for, say, TBC, Much of Wrath, etc. Utility's not well-rounded. It's actually very un-Mists of Pandaria-like, so when Blizzard tried to pare down the classes for the live game, and not have the classes have a solution to every problem, ideally that's them trying to get that old-school teamwork, but they're actually hit with criticism from players who wanted to be like Mists of Pandaria, where everyone was a superhero and it was a very high APM game. Of course, you know, I say all of this, I agree that the teamwork was maybe stronger in some aspects with the older design, but I also think about Mists of Pandaria gameplay and think, you know what, I could do with some of that. So overall, it is a very tricky balance even for the live team once they see Classic do well, because there are times where they've tried to apply at least some of the design lessons from how older aspects of WoW worked. They tried to apply those to the new game, and it could be just their implementation, but it obviously did not really hit the mark. But anyway, getting more into the news, so Classic will release on the 27th of August this year, and there will be 3 stress tests that will lead up to that, as well as character creation opening up on the 12th of August. So with all that, will Classic do well? I mean, it's actually hard to predict. We certainly do have some indicators that it will do well. World of Warcraft posted some of its best Twitch performance in quite a long time. A part of me, though, is somewhat suspicious about that. Not about, like, WoW Classic or anything like that, but just the mechanics of Twitch. So, if WoW has 180k viewers on Twitch, but 100,000 of them are Asmongold, well, that's people who are watching Asmongold play Classic. That's not necessarily people who will play Classic. Now, there will be large overlap, of course, but just considering the overall size of his stream, his criticism of live, and, you know, stories of what the old days were like, he's going to have a massive viewership draw there. I mean, hell, the same goes for, say, Soda Poppin', who, you know, I last saw around 60k. Basically, if you were to perform the statistical operation of removing the top and bottom 10% of people streaming Twitch and then average the viewer numbers, I don't think they would seem as large as they do. And I think that's mainly a function of how personality-driven Twitch is. You can have one person start playing WoW and its views will go up 40%. I'm actually far more interested in how the YouTube side performs, and it's not just because I'm a YouTuber. So take my second channel. 70% of the views on that channel are not from subscribers. The YouTube algorithm is very good at suggesting videos to people based on interests and trends, with the size of your subscribership not really mattering all that much. at least for a larger trend thing. So seeing how well Classic performs on YouTube will be very interesting. Now, I still do actually think that Classic will be a success overall. I wholly believe that in a number of the most important social and player story sort of MMO characteristics, it's a stronger game than Live, and I hope that Live can learn from that. Now, you might be wondering what the future of Classic is. Well, past the 6 phases of Classic launching, Blizzard have said that TBC and Wrath are actually both possibilities, depending on how Classic does, and that again is actually pretty exciting to me. That is really tracking the whole period of time where I first saw WoW and like played it and hit max level and all that stuff. I'd rather, though, see Blizzard go down the path of old-school RuneScape, to be honest with you. I'd actually like to see what would happen if Classic just continued development post-Naxxramas. Of course, that would happen in fresh servers. Old-school RuneScape, you see, is not just RuneScape 2007 forever. It's actually a full second game that is continuously developed with the spirit of the 2007 version of the game in mind, and that's now something that's more successful than modern RuneScape to quite a significant degree. So I actually do believe in Classic and a lot of the design pillars there, enough that I think the Blizzard would find great success if they followed the RuneScape model. Less because it's a perfect game, it's a big mess in many different ways, but it's a big fun mess, and it's one that creates stories that people want to share. Seeing a version of Warcraft be just developed in Classic spirit, I'd actually be really interested in that. I mean, the Classic team certainly seems to have a great understanding of what players appreciate with that game. Just look at their post of bugs that are actually features, or how they're implementing layering, right? Or, just how they've developed the layering with the entire intent being to turn it off as soon as possible, because they're clearly aware that players don't want sharding in the game. And that's something I personally agree with strongly. Just look at what cross-realm zones have done to the Live game. They've made it impossible for the worlds to matter. You can't do a Winter Grasp if you can just phase over to a different version of Azeroth. So with all of that stuff, I actually do think Classic will do pretty darn well. But with that, let's move on to the 15th anniversary. So Blizzard have revealed that they are doing a larger than normal in-game event for the 15th anniversary, with players getting a pet upon logging in and having a boss rush raid to contend with. Yeah, it's basically a greatest hits of past World of Warcraft bosses. Blizzard's post says that it will be available through the raid finder, which is a bit unfortunate in my view. I wouldn't mind them just cranking the numbers up for a normal or heroic raid, as messy as it might be. But still, it's a very cool idea, and for completing that raid, you will get the Obsidian Worldbreaker mount. It's basically just a Storm Dragon that's been reskinned to look like Deathwing, but it does look pretty cool. And then past that, there is a physical collector's edition for the 15th anniversary. It's got a fairly large Ragnaros statue that I like quite a bit. It's actually got one of the nicest collectible boxes that I've seen in a while, at least it looks pretty cool. It's got art prints, a map, a pin, 2 in-game mounts as well, a Wyvern and a Griffin that are skinned to look like flying statues, and it also comes with a month of game time. So overall, I don't think it's a particularly bad deal or anything like that. It certainly seems to be better than most collector's editions who would just do the game and what is in that box, but for like $229 or something. Or maybe 149. Anyway, as far as collectible statue prices goes, I think it's actually pretty reasonable. Now, it was sold out in the EU by the time that I got around to it, so if you're in a similar position, then you'll just have to be ready for when like third-party retailers like Amazon actually get it in stock. So the mounts from the collector's edition will also be available in the in-game store with a $25 bundle, and people who get both the bundle and the collector's edition will be refunded $25, but in Battle.net balance. So I mean, hey, the extra $25 is still going to Blizzard. But yeah, that's what's up with the 15th anniversary, and with Classic, I think it's pretty nice, but I think we should move on to stuff that is actually more important. And that is patch 8.2, and we're going to kick it off with loot design, because they're continuing to knock it out of the park. So a recent build of the PTR includes a new, just a new design for the armor that drops off Ashara. They all share an effect called Ashara Storm, so this storm will rise for 10 seconds every 2 minutes, and it is enhanced for every member who is wearing Ashara armor, providing you some nice stat buffs that are split between players. So it's basically just a nice power boost that you can kind of, get, get for your whole team if you just farm up Ashara for a bit. I mean, not totally different from what they did for Argus with all of those sort of buffs, but still pretty nice to see. Now, what's I think more important though is armor and weapons with special effects. As an example, there's one that increases damage done and taken by 10% for 15 seconds. Not thrilling, but it pretty much is just a sword that comes with an extra DPS cooldown. There are loads of similarly cool weapons, including ones with their own resource mechanics. On their own, they're things that are not game-changing, to be clear, but together and on top of essences, classes. I actually think this patch is doing far, far, far more for the gameplay of our classes than anything we've seen so far in Battle for Azeroth, which is not a high bar at all, but Blizzard are at least moving in the right direction. And then even as an aside to that, well, gear designs have been pretty boring for years. So class problems aside, seeing armor and weapons like this is still pretty heartening, and if it continued into a future expansion that otherwise had better class design, then I think it would be a very good place. Now that said, there is one strange design thing from an interview that people picked up on that I think is worth covering here. Blizzard basically gave an interview where they said there would be a PvP essence that would give you a 5th PvP talent, but that the PvP talent would also be active in PvE, which is pretty strange. And indeed, as Wowhead points out in their coverage of this, some PvP talents would be super impactful in PvE, like Focused Chaos, which increases Chaos Bolt damage by 85% at the cost of it not hitting your Havoc targets, which would be OP as hell in particular raiding environments, of course, depending on the fight. So, suffice to say, that just seems wacky. I think it's pretty unlikely it will make it into the game. It's, yeah, just a bit weird and confusing. So there was that, and then on the topic of interviews, it's just been interesting hearing Ian Hazzikostas recently in some of his classic interviews, just, talking about class fantasy, talking about where they may have went too far on the live version of the game. And sure, it's just words, but at least when I look at patch 8.2, I do see them trying to at least make gear a bit exciting again. So I mean, that could, it could be that those gear designs are basically the most easy quick fix they can do now, but that it indicates a philosophy shift. Hard to tell exactly, but I'll say this, I'm actually very keen to see what happens for World of Warcraft this BlizzCon, because that will be the next expansion announcement. It's also going to happen once Classic has been live for a few months, so I've just got to wonder, what will Blizzard's tone be? Will they be apologetic? If they're, will their BlizzCon presentation be more in alignment with what they know players are going to feel after BFA? Very interesting, and regardless, with Classic looming, it is set to be a hell of a year for Warcraft. So next, Tyrande, because yes, we had to have a little bit of drama in this one, but we're going to kick it into some lore. So, right, in a Q&A, it was said that Tyrande had got her vengeance and that she's not in patch 8.2 because they really needed the focus to be on Ashara and Sylvanas, the two Warbringers. So, this interview was a bit strange, to be honest, and I think I'm fairly sure why. So, yeah, there's only so much screen time in a patch, and while having Tyrande and Malfurion be involved with the Ashara would make tremendous sense, they're likely not going to do it because of their future plans. So with Tyrande undergoing the Night Warrior transformation and the various Elune mysteries that I've been talking about that Blizzard have been teasing for years, I'm fairly sure that she is going to be a very important character in the near future. She might even be the Jaina of her expansion, being a super, super important Alliance character. And I think that because they have that being a plan, they don't want to overexpose us to her now. Basically, I think that's what's going on. As for her not getting vengeance for the Night Elves, I don't think that's true at all, actually. I think it's pretty darn clear that her Night Warrior arc has got places to go. Blizzard have even teased future division within the Alliance, and that leads me to think that perhaps Tyrande and Gen will maybe fall out of favor with the rest of the Alliance, and maybe that will be driven by them both wanting vengeance for Teldrassil, but maybe they'll want to take that vengeance upon the newly reformed Horde at the end of this expansion, a Horde that, at least in terms of its leadership, is potentially a bit less culpable, though, I mean, it's hard to say that even of one that has got Thrall leading, like, Saurfang still helped with the burning of Teldrassil, technically, so yeah, Gen and co still would sort of have a bit of a justification to be angry at the new Horde, even if they boot out Sylvanas and it was technically her fault, or she was the instigator. But very interesting in terms of the lore. I do have actually a full lore video planned about what that expansion, I actually do believe there's going to be an Elune expansion, what that will be like, how the Night Warrior ties into it, but I still have a lot of work to do on that script. But yeah, anyway, that's it for the World of Warcraft news. So there's so much here. Let me know, what do you think about the live game? What do you think about these Elute design changes? And where are you with Classic? Are you going to be trying it out? Are you in the beta? Just, yeah, I'd love to hear what you got to say. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.